All right, today I want to welcome Scott Huesing. Thank you so much for being on with us and having this conversation and sharing your story. Scott is a United States Marine Corps retired major, and he is also a best-selling author of Echo in Ramadi. He is also the executive director of Save the Brave. So you can check out his website, savethebrave.org. And he is also, he reads the foreword in Dr. Shauna Springer's book, Warrior. And I would love to put a plug in for that too. It's a fantastic book. Yeah. So Scott, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad we could do this. We're coming to you live from Dallas Fort Worth International Airport at Papacito's restaurant. So, and my fellow brother, Nick Velez, he's the president of Save the Brave. He's sitting right over here across from me, and we're flying back to San Diego today, but it's great to be a part of this. It's a great group. I love being able to say yes to stuff, especially for people in this community that are just doing the right things for the right people. I think it's really what we're all about. And the message that you share, Sarah, that's really important. I mean, you just can't get enough of it. Honestly, I think in the veteran space, there's almost a point where they were hitting a wall where they felt they were being thanked too much, or their stories were being shared a lot through social media, and they're kind of pulling back. And I don't want to encourage that. I want them to sustain that. I don't think it needs to be in everyone's face all the time, but there's such a balance that needs to be reached. But the more important stories are not only the veterans, but people who support us and allow us and enable us to share our stories. So this is really cool. So I'm really grateful to be able to carve out an hour and on my way back and travel. And this isn't the first time I get caught in the airport on an interview. So I'm happy to answer any and all questions that the group has. And you can talk about writing, we can talk about transition, we can talk about bull riding. I am here in Texas. I don't know where Parker's at. Where are you at, Parker?
I'm north of you. I'm in Arkansas.
Arkansas, got it. Okay. Cool. So yeah, ROEs are pretty loose, man. So you guys feel free to fire away.
Yeah, I would love to hear even more about what got you to want to write this book, Echo in Ramadi. What is it about? What is your story with that?
The book itself is obviously, it's historical nonfiction. It's a memoir. It's my story. It's also the story of the Marines and soldiers that fought, but also the families that supported us. And over the last, we launched the book it's been over 2.5 years. And I tell people now it's not a war story. It's a story about people and the amazing Marines that fought alongside of me, the soldiers and the families that supported us while we fought. And then when we came back home through the past 10 years, really is how long it, when the story came out, it was 10 years after the fight in Ramadi, and helping us deal with the aftermath of war and what they've dealt with. They've got to handle all of the mess. They're really cleaning up the mess as well, emotionally and sometimes physically, with what guys create and our warrior tribe that has to return back and reintegrate. I mean, we talk about transition, but we don't really talk about reintegration of how that process works. And I think that's vastly different from transition. Most people associate that with, I'm leaving the service and I was a truck driver in the Marine Corps or the Army, and now I'm going to be over the road, or I'm starting my own business. So the story, I think, has really grown into something more than what I expected it to be, because now I get emails and instant messages from total strangers across the world who are not military. There's a nurse from West Virginia or a lawyer from North Dakota. It's been overwhelming to see the success and be able to share the story, because again, it's not a war story. It's a story about leadership and team building and overcoming adversity. And that message, I think, is something that I like to share more than anything, because had it not been for the leadership at every level, from the senior level down to that Lance Corporal or soldier on the ground, supporting each other, we wouldn't have been able to do this show. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for guys like Nick Velez, who's sitting across from me, who is one of my, he was one of my machine gunners in Ramadi. And, that's the connection that we continue to share today. And I'm really fortunate to be able to do that. Those stories and people reaching out to me from around the nation it's overwhelming sometimes, to be honest with you, because I never really thought when I wrote this story it would have that type of impact. And it's been cool to see that. And when you get, especially like when you're in an airport and someone yells your name across and you're like, hey, you wrote that book, and it's like, do I know you? And then normally it's a Marine, because they see me, but it's pretty humbling, I got to tell you. So every time I do a show or an interview and people ask that question, I'm really proud of that fact, personally.
What is it that's touching them in the book? Like, why are they responding? Is it remembering that, or connecting to how to transition, or what exactly is it?
Well, I'll share two stories, or I think examples are the best way to articulate that. One was when the book first came out, there was an email I received from this soldier. His name is Phil Morehouse, and I've talked to Phil. I use his name all the time because I talk about him all the time. And he sent me an email and he said, "Dear sir, I remember," or he goes, "Hey, I read your book, and I remember that night when you guys drove through Ramadi on December 6th when Corporal Libby was shot. He was one of our squad leaders that died on December 6th. And he said, I was at Camp Corregidor when you guys drove through the chem lights, and I was inside the BAS, and I remember your Marines carrying Corporal Libby, and I remember you, and I remember the look on your face, and I remember every single step that you took. And I remember the sound of the brakes and the dust around the vehicles." He said, "And I haven't thought about those things in 12 years, and until I read your book." He said, he goes on in the email, but he ended it with something very important. He said, "Yes, we made a difference." And, I had to find out who this guy was. I emailed him back, and I said, I was in tears reading that email, but it just really, really powerful when you get that. And this is a soldier, I'll tell Phil this. I said, man, I probably walked past you, 100 times in that COC, because he was a clerk, he was an admin, this nameless, faceless soldier. I probably walked by, never met him. And then on the back end, I get a letter from it was actually the nurse in West Virginia, is one recent one. Her daughter, it starts off like, my daughter is dating a Marine. I'm like, oh, great. This is going to be a 5-scroller. And it was something to the effect that she really wanted to learn about the military because her daughter was dating a Marine. And I can understand that, but she bought the book and she read the story, and she works in the ER. And she said, I really never understood what the book was about. I absolutely know what the Marines do now, but the sacrifice that you guys made, and this was right at the outset of COVID and everything that was going on. And I emailed her back and I said, you as a trauma nurse absolutely understand about loss and overcoming adversity and dealing with those things on a daily basis, kind of like our Marines did. And I think that's important to recognize. And I just wanted to thank her for sharing that with me and let her know that I kind of understood what she was going through as well. So you get this really wide expanse of readers. When you have so many readers out there, it's awesome because I've learned more about that. I've gained perspective and appreciation from just complete strangers, and then obviously from guys I know too. It's really validating to know that when you invest years of your life into putting something together, you not only honor those that are still living, you're also honoring those we lost and really inspiring another generation. So there's a lot of second and third order effects of doing that. And if people are inclined to do that, I'm just say do it, and we'll figure out the rest.
I wanted to say thanks, and I appreciate the fact of you bringing up how kind of that thank you for my service or thank you for your service kind of thing has become, um, I guess, overcrowded, and it started to turn into a trend where people were saying, don't thank me for my service, kind of thing,
Yeah.
and I kind of felt like that was, yes, I did my job kind of thing, and I was very proud to do it. And I didn't feel like I was the guy who needed to walk through a crowd and have people say thank you. But I really find that on the backside of that, you start to, devalue really the amazing things that the troops did, whether the Marines, Navy, Air Force, whatever. And on top of that, you really devalues sort of like that America coming together, so to speak, like back in the World War II days where people were just so proud of America as a whole, because of what they were able to accomplish, overseas against the axis of evil. That was just a huge, binding thing of saying, this is what we can do as a country, whether you're overseas fighting or you're back home supporting, one or the other. That support element is just as important. And so, I think it's very powerful. And I think that's one thing that we don't need to get rid of is that thank you for your service kind of thing. Not that the individuals need it, but the country as a whole really benefits from just the concept itself.
Can I jump in on that too? It's interesting because I do feel like thank you for your service is necessary on an individual level and, as you're saying, as a country. Just because you think about how like Vietnam vets were treated when they came back, right? Like they didn't get to hear that. And on the call that Sarah was mentioning earlier with Jacob, he had mentioned his uncle, who's a Vietnam vet, just had committed suicide about a year ago. And if he had heard like my story, it could have made a difference. So for me, like I really hold on to like I thank every veteran I meet, and I really want, because you never know what that one ounce of gratitude is going to do for someone.
So much on that. I think I think one thing that I personally have learned through these talks, through having so many different people, and you see and you hear the different angles of people's service, or if they're a supporter or if they're a helper, and it kind of makes this kind of rich understanding of what military life is about, what the struggles are going through transition. And really too, I think for me, it really put it on my radar, like, oh my gosh, the sacrifice, like really the full picture of the sacrifice that no matter what a person's job is, when you sign on that line, you give up your rights, and you serve in whatever way the country needs you. And I think, the thank you for your service, I think it keeps it on all of our radar. The civilians' radar. It's one small step to keeping us connected. I think civilians really, really need to be connected with our military, because if we're sending people out to serve in whatever capacity, we owe it to our military to understand more the sacrifice and to really understand what the challenges are during transition. And so that's why I really love to start these conversations and hear people's different angles. I think a lot of things start bubbling up, maybe a hardship for people during transition now, or like the call that Vaughn was on. Jacob actually did an Iraq Fallujah 15-year reunion and ended up bringing over 300 Marines who fought that battle together, and how there was so much closure, there was so much healing that came from that reunion. And so it's kind of the same thing what I'm hearing too, like when you share about your book and about the response you get when people are reading that book, is just kind of the healing and maybe the understanding and clarity of their own story and feeling connected back again. And how can we help our veterans? how can we help support more their transition back to reintegration, like you spoke before?
Well, I mean, there's, 3 other vets, on here, and we all know them. And I always throw this disclaimer out when people stick their foot in this water. It's like, I'm not the spokesperson for the veteran community. I never say I am. I have a lot of experience. I've served commands at multiple levels. I was enlisted. I think I have good perspective. But when people say like, oh, how do I help veterans? What are you doing? What are you willing to do? And, I learned a lot of lessons along the way. And one of them was I rode my Harley across the country this summer and drove through every city in the Southern Belt. And you realize through guys like Pete Turner on the Break It Down show, he says, charity's not supposed to be easy. Helping other people isn't supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be hard. It should be harder to give of your time to someone in need, or the last $5 in your wallet to someone that can use it more, instead of buying something you want. To answer that question, you need way more than an hour in an airport on how we help our veteran community reintegrate. I think really being knowledgeable, if you're really one of the leaders in this community that are serious about helping, get smart about doing it. Being a leader is all about educating yourself and being a lifelong learner. And let's talk about what you should be doing, what you should be reading, who you should be following on social media to continue to improve yourself as a leader in the veteran nonprofit space, as a helper. Guys like Sebastian Younger, who wrote Tribe, read that book. Shauna Springer, his name's on the front of her book. Read her book. You can read my book. There's a countless list of examples of what to do to continue to lead and serve. But, he's not on screen. But Nick and I were sitting at a table just like this. And when one of our guys shot himself in the head on a cold night in the middle of Minnesota, we said, we can't just sit around and talk about this. We threw some money in the bank, and Nick did all the legwork, filing the paperwork. And he says, hey, sir, will you help me do this? Because Nick was one of my Marines in Ramadi. And we just do it. And we've grown at the right rate. And we, being down here in Texas, we're reconnecting with other vets. Our whole mission is to connect people in a safe space and through outreach programs, and help our Gold Star families and our first responders who, let's face it, a lot of the first responders out there, they're prior military in some sense, and they were young kids when they transitioned out. But to answer that question, how to help, I think is you got to be willing to put some skin in the game. You got to be willing to hop on a plane, give up a Saturday, show up at an event. And, there's a lot in this nonprofit space with SaveTheBrave.org. Anybody that's done this work and his work, and I don't take a dime for it. I don't get a salary. Nick doesn't get paid. You kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince. But I'm telling you, you keep at it, just like any mission in life, in business, in school, in the military. You'll find those princes and princesses out there. And we were surrounded by them here in Texas this week to fly in and be picked up. And just, it's kind of humbling to be treated that way, like royalty, when we're invited out to these places. And it's just a little bit overwhelming. But, you can talk about doing stuff all day, but you got to do it. You got to get on a plane. You got to fly across the country sometimes. Risk. What are the acceptable risks? How much can you give of yourself? One of the things Nick and I realized as we were down here to kind of do the reconnaissance at Wildcat Creek Ranch to make sure it's a safe space for veterans. We brought 2 veterans down, one from Chicago, one from Southern California, so they could experience it while we sniffed them out a bit. It was a great place. We realized it was an awesome time for us to hit our reset button as well, because at our level, and Tony knows this too, because he was at that level as a senior leader, you're so busy taking care of other people at times, you don't often take time to take care of yourself. And that's an important thing when you're talking about reintegration of veterans and what the best modality is, whether it's therapy, pharmacology, whatever it is. We have the resources, Save the Brave, where if we're not doing it ourselves, I can dial my phone up and find someone to direct them to. And that's the power of this network. And what we're all about is connecting people in a safe space. So they feel like this is my thing. You know, maybe hunting pigs with a knife in the middle of the Texas woods isn't your thing. I get it. Maybe fishing is your thing. Maybe it's hiking. We do all that. And normally we don't do it ourselves. We have people that do it for us. And we just are able to send those guys, and through donor support and people giving their talent and people like you, Sarah, sharing this story. Like, yeah, we definitely want to talk about that, because at the end of the day, if I wrote another book about veteran suicide, it'd be stop killing yourself, please. Because that's really what we want to do at Save the Brave. I don't really care two squirts about suicide awareness. I care about suicide prevention. How do we prevent it? How do we keep guys connected? And these young men and women who gave 4 or 24 years of their life to serve their country, so we can sit in the airport and drink Starbucks and, you know, travel around. How do we get them to stop killing themselves? Because they're not statistics. They're our friends. They're people we know. And the number of veterans we've lost from our war is now over what we lost in war. That's a mind blower. And Vaughn, you know, such a great point. You know, our veteran community, which is dwindling, never got this, you know. So it's important at Save the Brave that we include all of those generations into what we do. We've got Vietnam vets we've taken out fishing. Every branch of service. So long answer to a really longer question, to be honest with you, but I'd be interested to hear any other opinions on it for sure.
I'd be interested to hear your transition, please. Okay, the Patrick, please. Like your transition story, like when you transitioned from the military to civilian life, like what was that like for you? Like how did you get from that to where you are now? Because you know, as I work with people in transition, there's the overall sense I get from everyone I talk to is like this transition is scarier than anything I've been through.
Yeah, a lot of veterans will use that word. Man, I'm nervous or I'm scared about transitioning. I'm like, scared. I'm like, don't use that word. Use excited. Like, put a positive spin on it. That's what I was always doing as I was moving out of the military. 24 years of service is a long time. Like, I get it. It was a big part of who I am, but it didn't really define me as a person. And I think that's the message I share with transitioning guys. And I talk to guys like Tony, who were at the senior level, colonels, sergeants major, all these guys that spent their whole life, whole career taking care of people. I say, hey, what's your plan when you get out? No idea. I'm like, really? Really? Weren't you just in charge of 2,500 Marines and soldiers and sailors, and you have no plan? But you have to approach everything that way moving out. And the great thing for me was when I transitioned out, I had a job while I was on terminal leave. And you know, it was a great job. The money was great. And then I felt like, you know, I don't think I'm going to do this for 20 years like I did in the Marine Corps. So I transitioned again. And every single transition, even if you get fired from a job, that's a transition. It doesn't have to be negative, because now you know what wrong looks like. Now you know what right looks like. And if you're able to do that every time you transition, every time you interview, every time you change business models, every time you adapt to a pandemic and get smarter, you're winning. So that's the mentality that a lot of guys think that they lose because they're not surrounded by the protective bubble of the military. But if you step far outside of your comfort zone, you realize there's so many other people out there, whether it's on social media, whether it's in the real world, you have more support than you really realize. But if you stay insulated and you realize, and you keep riding on what you did in the military, I did this, like, no one cares. I mean, no one really cares about what you did in the military. No one cares that I don't care that I was, I wrote this book. I'm like, what am I doing now? Like, if you look at the time clock on this show, we're talking about working with veterans and doing great things now, or in 2 years or in 5 years. Like, that's what I did. That's not what I'm doing now. That's what I want to be remembered. Like, man, that guy Huesing was always doing something. Like, we could never keep track of that guy. And you may not have always seen it, but that's what I was always about. It's like, what am I going to do next? And that's kind of the true definition of meritocracy is, hey, Vaughn, I'm going to give you a raise or promotion on what you're capable of, not what you did. but what I expect from you in the future. And I think a lot of leaders at the corporate level, when I go speak to universities or corporate leadership conferences, like that's something they tend to forget. Like, well, then don't promote them. Don't waste funds on giving these guys jobs just because they've been here for 2 years. Like, make them earn it. So my transition and transitions have been great. And now I'm working on a full-length feature documentary. And guess what? I know nothing about filmmaking. So take notes, Huesing, because the real lesson is, like most of you know, sitting in this room, it's all about surrounding yourself with smart people. And I'm very, very fortunate to do that. But I'm also very, I guess, very unabashed at asking for help and saying, hey, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to make a film, but I know Billy Ray. I call him up and I said, hey, how do you do this? How do you do the finances? How do you do the structure for it? The guy calls me back at 10 o'clock. And he says, hey, yeah, cool, man. Great question. And then my executive producer, Anthony Zucker, says, and I'm not name dropping here. I'm just like, I'm not afraid to ask these people. You know why? Because they're industry leaders. I'm not going to ask some other struggling documentarian like, hey, how are you failing today? But those are good questions too, right? So we all learn, and that's another transition I'm going through. So be excited, I guess, about transitioning. There's nothing to be scared of, especially for guys that, hey, weren't you kicking doors in Ramadi or Fallujah 6 or 7 years ago, or now 14 years ago? Or weren't you flying a jet or something like that? It's pretty scary. Like, getting a job isn't a scary thing. Anyway.
So thank you for that. So a couple of things I took from that is to share the idea of like being scared is a similar feeling as excitement, right? So they can change their perspective to excitement, and then whatever their transition is, it doesn't mean it has to be the end, like the final transition. They can continue on to do other transitions throughout the rest of their life. And that reminded me when I was listening to it was Veterans Day, a Veterans Day. They were honoring veterans, and someone from the Honor Foundation, someone on the board of directors, Sergeant General Michael Nagata, his suggestion was like, you have already sacrificed. Do something that brings you joy, right? Choose something that brings you joy, which I thought was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, more guys sharing that message is like, look, the money's not going to make you happy. The job's not going to make you happy. The people aren't going to make you happy. You have to make you happy. And you're right. And in the modern workplace too, especially with what's going on, transitioning every year, transitioning every 2 years, that's kind of acceptable. I think that more people are willing to do that. And if you can kind of grasp that and embrace that concept, I think you see a lot of veteran entrepreneurs succeeding, using social media in the right ways for marketing and promotion and connecting. There's just a lot of different ways to do that, but what'd you call him, a sergeant general? He got like a double
lieutenant general,
double promotion,
captain, lieutenant general, sergeant.
I can't see Tony. I can see the other guy's face, but I'm
like, what is she talking about?
What? I served under him.
Yeah, right. I think. What was the one last thing? Oh, it's interesting. You talk about like how people are hiring in the workplace, and I think the way you discuss it, I work with a lot of recruiters, and it's interesting because the old way was like, let's look at your resume, see what your skills were, what you've done in the past, and now you can have the job. Where even in the corporate world now, recruiters saying like the recruiters are moving towards what you said is more like, what are your skills and what is your potential, rather than let me see what you've proven.
Yeah. You think of you in the parochial mindset. If you scroll down Vaughn's LinkedIn page, you looked at her experience, and like she had a different job every year, where you'd be like, oh, she must not be in it for the long game. But then you think, what if she got a year of training in each one of those positions? And like, now I'm going to hire her and I'm going to pay her all the money I can to keep her. Like, that's a person you kind of want. So yeah, you're right. Great question though. Yeah.
Thank you.
And very applicable for what you do at Honor Foundation. Yeah.
And that's why I asked, because now I'm like, I can say that I didn't make this up. Scott told me.
Yeah. Well, we know all this. We know a lot of the same people, and we'll figure that out. And I got to figure it out. I know, and I've gotten a tour of the West Coast campus too. So it's awesome what you guys are doing down there. And I know a lot of the alum. One of them was out here with me on this trip. Brad Ledbetter.
I know Brad Ledbetter. He's out of Camp Pendleton, right?
He was. He's retired
Yes,
now.
yeah, he
So,
just retired. Oh, we had to reach out to him.
11 interviews. 11 interviews this week. Yeah, crazy, but
That's great. Well, thank you for answering my question and giving me those tools to use.
Well, I'm curious too, just in the spirit of, again, realizing, or, seeing how your strengths and your superpowers can translate into civilian life. I think it was you, Vaughn. Didn't you bring up at one time to think about what brought you joy when you were a kid? Was that you?
I use it in transition night as part of the programming. So yeah, oh yeah, I told you about it too, because when we talk about in transition night is, again, like these are special force operators transitioning from military to civilian careers. So, and I love what you said too, again, Scott, about like, you're transitioning from this lifestyle. You may not even know what brings you joy yet. So you have to try, and that may mean several transitions. But yeah, so we did work around like, what's a possibility? And the first thing a lot of people will build, like, I want to be a CFO, a COO, or whatever applies to their current skills. But then we'll move on to some more creative exercise, like, well, what if I asked you what you enjoyed about, what was your hobby when you were a kid? Or what brought you joy when you were a child? Is there any possibility in that for you in your future? And then that gets people thinking more about, outside the box and getting more creative.
I would
was
think
that was
oh,
there
go
wasn't a
ahead.
question. There wasn't a question in there, was there?
You missed it?
There's some like some Christmas music playing or something there.
I was thinking that was just a really great point, because I think sometimes if people are conditioned for 2 decades, being in the military, and then you get out and you get to actually explore what brings you joy, you actually have almost the permission to say, oh, I get to go and explore and find something that is unique to what I can give and does bring joy. I love having Vaughn on these calls because of her creativity and just that's a great synergy to have somebody like Vaughn with all her creativity and military, because, people get to rediscover like how they're actually created, what are their superpowers, what are their joy.
Well, superpowers are hard to, I guess, measure from a metric, but I like to talk about value, what your value is and what you're worth. And a lot of people don't understand that transitioning veterans are the worst, because they live an entire life, maybe it's 4 years, maybe it's 24 years of this life of service as a superhero, right? Wearing a uniform and being enabled with all these things. And they don't really understand what their value is. And I asked a lot of guys when I talked to them, I said, wait, what's your hourly rate? And this would be a big wig or some guy in a startup or a guy like Mike. You're like, hey, I'm going to do a podcast. Like, great. What's your hourly rate? What are you going to charge your sponsors? What are you going to charge your clients? They have no clue. That's why I know what I'm worth. I know what my value is. Like, I know what 24 years in the military and all these schools and a degree and 60 countries and 10 deployments. I understand the value of that. And if there's some guy that comes along and maybe he only did 4 years, I'm like, well, what's your value? Like, here's the scale, man. You got to figure that out. But a lot of guys go into that. And the worst part, the thing that bothers me the most is a lot of these guys are giving it away for free. And I'm not saying you got to gouge the public and lean on your military service or take advantage of that or wave it in people's face. But you have to value yourself and really understand that, you're a valuable commodity, whether you're a storyteller, whether you're a business person. Only you can do what you do, and you've only seen it through your lens. And if people want that, it's really up to you as a business person or whatever it is, like what I do, to really sell that. Like, nobody's going to know what you did unless you show them how you did it or present it in a way. It's just the reality. And I think that there's a lot of guys in our community that are really afraid to do that. And you talk to an audience that is sitting in class at the Honor Foundation, all these special operators and all the guys will agree with me is, Marines and soldiers, especially infantry guys, we're never really ever accused of being humble in large groups, but you pull them out of that environment and individually, for some reason, they're almost humble to a fault, and Tony, man, I wrote it down. Don't devalue what you've done. I mean, that includes like the thank you for your service thing is, kind of propaganda, or, it's kind of rhetoric at this point. But, don't devalue what you learned in the military or your experiences in life. I mean, there's so many things and connections we make throughout that if you devalue that and you don't understand what your own value is, man, you're really, really going to struggle in transition. And I mean, I love helping those guys, and I've thrown plenty of ropes over the rails of the ship, try and pull them on board. But, some of them just destined to sink into the water, man. They don't want to grab hold, or they're just too lazy to do it, man. They're not going to do the work. And I always put people to the mat, and I say, you got to do the work, man. I'm not going to do that for you. I'm not going to do the writing for you. I'm not going to edit this. I'm not going to write your speech. I'm not going to build the plan for you. You have to do the work. And then when it's ready, I'll help you. And if I can't do it, I guarantee you I know people in my network that can. So it's really, really prevalent in today's, military community.
Yeah, one of the topics that I talk about, because I like to take a lot of, especially during the transition time, is to take that language that they knew and they grew up with in the military and find a way to apply that to their transition itself. And so essentially, just making sure that the message gets across so that it's completely understood, so if they're still working through that transition, a lot of the language is still working on the maturity piece, so
Yeah.
if to get that message across the right way, I do the translation piece of saying, it's an operational environment. And when I came into the military in the 90s, even though it was after Desert Storm, essentially all of our training was evolved still around jungle warfare. We still wore the old jungle BDUs. We still had the V formations, as that we were training in. Even though we had been to, the desert, it didn't change. It wasn't until the 2000s, when we started heading into Afghanistan and then Iraq, that the TTPs and the ability to kind of learn on ground sort of changed our training tactics, and I completely 100% agree with you that it's that action, that not just the awareness. I can't just continue to do the jungle warfare training and be aware that the enemy is changing tactics. I have to actually take action in changing my own TTPs into training and learning those tactics myself, and how am I going to stay one step ahead. But understanding that operational environment and adjusting how I attack that new problem, on even in 2020, I mean, I think that everybody in the entire world is learning their new operational environment and having to be innovative and implement those TTPs into every single bit of their life, regardless if they're military or civilian, but taking that action to adjust to the new problems, taking that action to adjust to the new journey, to the new, experience, to to whatever else they're jumping into, and to be able to, change the way they operate to still be successful at the end of the day. But yeah, it's to me, I kind of teach it in that old method, so that way the translation gets across much quicker. But understanding that your operational environment is changing, and that you've got to create those new TTPs.
100%.
I think you hit a point about putting a figure, or you put a monetary value on your worth. And I was thinking a point is you can't. It's hard. It was hard for me to put a value on my experience. I was a sailor. I worked on aircraft, and I've been working on aircraft for 30 years. 20 of them in the Navy, and now another 10 outside the Navy. And so I don't have the brotherhood of what I would say a ground infantry like yourself. I feel that I work with some guys that did that, and you can see the difference in a veteran that was an infantry. I look at my uncle, who fought and was a platoon lieutenant in the Army in Vietnam, and growing up with him, he struggled. He has struggled his entire life with coming to terms and not hearing any stories about what he went through. And I finally, about 4 or 5 years ago, I went back to Florida with my family for the first time, and he had went to a reunion of the platoon that he led, and his wife of 45 years had never heard things that were coming out of his mouth when he got with his brothers, and he still didn't talk about it with his own family. These were situations that he went through in boots on ground in Vietnam, and I take that for what I did. And I don't have that experience like that. I didn't, like you said, I did my job. So going back on that, I don't know what I can do. And I think you're right with having to read and figure out the worth of what my worth is to put into my community to help my brothers and sisters that are transitioning, or not just transitioning, having issues while they're in or after they're out. That's just my 2 cents, I guess. That's the experiences that I've gone through.
No, it's not something unique to you. I've heard similar stories about that on 2 points. One, our Vietnam vets, our World War II vets, Korean War vets, why did they wait 40, 50 years to share their story and to have those mechanisms, those channels to share? Whether, we have social media, we got guys writing books. And it was important to me that we didn't wait 50 years because, when you think about those stories that were written are history, and they wrote them 40 years after the fact. How much of that is embellished? How much of that was forgotten? What have we not captured because there weren't leaders willing to share those stories? And then there's guys that weren't in those, hacking the jungle apart with a machete and an M16 or kicking doors in Fallujah, Iraq. The fact that when I hear that from guys like you, I really hope it's not the case where you're still equally as proud for your service. And it's important for me to always say that to guys like, listen, man, don't ever say I was just an airplane mechanic or I was just a truck driver in the Army. You were never just anything. You were part of less than 0.5% of the entire American population that served your country. And that is something to be proud of. Tony, I'm gonna steal that, Tony. Don't devalue that. And because without those guys fixing the planes, guys like me wouldn't have air support and logistics and supplies and everything else. Everybody supports the infantry and what we do, but everybody's equally vital to the success of the mission, man. And that has value as well. It's like, you know what? I'm capable of supporting 2,500 guys on the ground with one airplane. Pretty powerful. That's, it's all about perspective, I suppose. And that's something I've learned through age and experience. And, that's where you soak up a little bit of the wisdom, I suppose.
Any other thoughts? We're going to have to end.
Yeah, two points on that. We're running out of time and my battery's running low. So, but it worked out good. I was looking at my phone with the battery thing and stressing out a little bit, but we got it. We got it.
Well, any last questions for Scott before we say goodbye here? Okay.
I just want to say thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for what you're doing. Again, it's that action that's putting back into the veteran community that is, it's the new unsung hero kind of action. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, well, thanks to Sarah for having me on. I want to say thanks to you, Vaughn, Tony, the mics. James was off, I think, a little bit, but I hope he's still tuned in. So, but hey, anything you guys need, I love doing stuff like this. You get a few new friends out of the deal and you expand your network. always ask me if you need something from me. I'm always available. I think you guys all have access to me now. And the same thing, I'm not shy. I'll probably they're like, hey, Scott's calling me. Great. You probably need something. So I will ask. But Nick put it aptly this week. He said, you know what? Closed mouths don't get fed. So be one of those guys that's, asking the questions, and then, also willing to be fed is, I think, is important in what we do. So, man, Sarah, thank you so much. And if you ever need additional guests, you guys need anything, please reach out to me. And yeah, just very grateful to be on and Semper Fi, and take care, guys.
Yeah, Scott, thank you for being on. Thank you for starting this conversation. I think, again, the whole point of this is to have a landing spot. People know that they can come, they can have another family here, they can talk about what is on their mind, what's on their heart, and like you said, expand the network. I think, like Jennifer Tracy says, I'm going to borrow her phrase, that we are stronger together. And every single conversation is so valuable. Everything is. And so again, thank you for taking the time. It's really good to actually see you in person here. I mean, virtually. And also, again, always love the people that come on. Mike, Vaughn, Tony, Michael, I just really appreciate you guys so much. So listen, if I don't see you, have a fantastic Christmas. Enjoy your plane ride back, and thanks again.